What if one of the biggest names in music was secretly running a criminal empire, right in plain sight? What if the fame, the flashing cameras, the Grammys, the red carpet appearances, all of it was just a disguise? A well-oiled machine designed not only to entertain millions, but to hide something darker, something almost unthinkable. This isn't a movie. This isn't fiction. This is what federal prosecutors are now trying to prove in a real courtroom against none other than Shawn "Diddy" Combs, one of the most iconic figures in hip-hop history. To the world, Diddy is a mogul, a man who turned bad boy records into a cultural empire, a businessman, a producer, a billionaire, maybe even a role model. But to a growing list of alleged victims, whistleblowers, and former insiders, he may be something else entirely. In a federal courtroom in Manhattan, a disturbing story is starting to unfold, one involving racketeering, forced exploitation through fraud, coerced, intimate coercive encounters, and a network of handlers, security, and staff who prosecutors claim were used to recruit, control, and silence victims. The allegations aren't just about bad behavior or toxic relationships. They speak of a system, a criminal enterprise with rules, roles, and rituals. And here's the kicker. The alleged criminal activity didn't happen 20 years ago. It wasn't buried in some distant past. Prosecutors claim it was happening recently, as late as 2024. While Diddy was walking red carpets, attending fashion shows, launching liquor brands, his hotel rooms were being raided, his hard drives seized, his alleged secrets exposed. We're talking about a man who, according to federal agents, traveled with bags of drugs, stashes of baby oil, hidden cash, and videos. Videos that one woman claims were used as a tool for threat-based manipulation. We're talking about hotel surveillance footage, real security camera video, where he's allegedly seen dragging, hitting, and kicking his ex-girlfriend through a luxury hallway, wearing nothing but a towel and socks. And the woman at the center of it all? Cassandra "Cassie" Ventura, Diddy's former partner of over a decade, now the government's star witness. Her testimony paints a picture not just of abuse and control, but of a man who allegedly weaponized fame, wealth, and influence to break people psychologically and keep them under his command. This story is raw. It's complex. It's filled with contradictions, denials, testimonies, and emotional fallout. And while Diddy's legal team insists that all encounters were consensual and that this is nothing more than a dramatic breakup amplified by fame, the prosecution is building a case that could potentially send one of music's biggest icons to prison for the rest of his life. So, how did we get here? What exactly was found in those hotel rooms? What does the star witness say happened behind closed doors? And how much of it can the jury believe? Let's break it all down, because if what's being alleged is true, we're not just watching the fall of a celebrity. We're witnessing the unraveling of a hidden empire, built not on music, but on fear, silence, and control. The courtroom buzzed with tension as week 2 of the trial against Shawn "Diddy" Combs began in the Southern District of New York. But this wasn't just any trial. This wasn't about tax evasion or a business dispute. This was a federal case involving some of the most serious charges in the U.S. legal system: racketeering conspiracy, forced exploitation through fraud, coercion, or manipulation, cross-state movement linked to exploitative encounters. At stake is more than just Diddy's reputation. At stake is the very foundation of the legacy he spent decades building, because prosecutors aren't claiming he committed a single crime in a moment of weakness. They're claiming he built a system, a machine, a criminal enterprise that allegedly used his wealth, fame, staff, and influence to control and exploit people for years. According to the prosecution, Diddy didn't act alone. He used a network of insiders, assistants, security guards, handlers, personal employees, even hotel staff, to set up private, intimate, coercive encounters across cities like Miami, Los Angeles, and New York. These weren't consensual parties, the government says. These were orchestrated events, meticulously planned and designed to satisfy one man's appetite, at the cost of other people's freedom, dignity, and safety. Inside the courtroom, federal prosecutors began weaving a narrative that felt more like the plot of a high-budget crime thriller than real life. But this is real life. And the names, the footage, the testimonies, none of it is scripted. As the trial moves forward, the government is determined to prove that Combs used his companies, Bad Boy Entertainment, his liquor brands, his media teams, not just as businesses, but as cover for arranging illicit activities, transporting alleged victims across state lines, and paying hush money when things went too far. And they're doing it by laying out the pieces, one disturbing detail at a time. The courtroom has already seen dozens of sealed exhibits and heard hours of emotionally charged testimony. Agents from Homeland Security have taken the stand. Victims have shared what they claim happened behind luxury suite doors. Graphic evidence, photos, emails, even a prescription bottle labeled with an alias has been entered into the record. But perhaps the most chilling part of this case isn't just the list of items found. It's how recent they are, because what's being alleged didn't happen in some distant past. Prosecutors say the crimes continued up until late 2024. In fact, when Diddy was arrested in September of that year, they say he walked right into New York with the very materials that supported the charges, as if he believed he was untouchable. It's bold, it's brazen, it's deeply unsettling. But we're only just beginning to understand the full scope of the allegations. Because the next piece of the puzzle, it comes from the woman who lived through it all, and finally decided to speak. If the first week of testimony painted an outline, week 2 began to fill in the brutal, graphic details. According to prosecutors, Diddy didn't just commit crimes, he industrialized them. The courtroom heard that his empire wasn't only about music or branding, it was also about control, about orchestrated, methodical sex marathons the prosecution calls intimate coercive encounters, events that involved drugs, mood lighting, cameras, and, allegedly, pressured involvement. These weren't spontaneous encounters, they were premeditated, and prosecutors say they were facilitated by his employees. Hotel rooms were allegedly booked under aliases. Assistants were sent to retrieve specific items. Security staff stood guard. And most disturbingly, these weren't isolated incidents, the prosecution claims. They were part of a repeated pattern, stretching across years, cities, and victims. The term freak-off itself has become one of the trial's most infamous phrases. Homeland Security Special Agent Yasin Binda, who works with the agency's human trafficking unit, took the stand and detailed what was found when they searched Diddy's hotel room at the Park Hyatt in Manhattan, just hours after his arrest. What she described was deeply unsettling. A black fanny pack stuffed with $9,000 in cash. A hard drive, its contents still undisclosed. A prescription bottle labeled under a fake name, Frank Black. And everywhere, baby oil, lubricant, bottles upon bottles, in the bathtub, in the nightstand, in Ziploc bags. One photograph showed 5 bottles neatly placed by the drain. Another, 2 more hidden in drawers. Agents testified that hundreds more were later found during raids on his properties in Los Angeles and Miami. Why so much? Prosecutors allege it was all for the intimate coercive encounters, a key part of Diddy's alleged system of exploitation. The abundance of these items, paired with the testimonies from alleged victims, suggests they were tools for coercion, part of a ritual, not random. And it wasn't just oil and lubricant. Special Agent Binda also testified about controlled substances discovered in the same room. One prescription bottle contained a pink powdery substance sealed in a Ziploc bag. The contents were tested by Homeland Security labs and came back positive for ketamine and MDMA. That's where things got even darker. Because prosecutors claim these drugs weren't just present, they were part of a broader strategy, a method of keeping victims compliant, disoriented, vulnerable. Cassie herself, Diddy's ex and star witness, would later testify that ketamine was often present during these sessions. She claimed it was used as part of the freak-off experience, and that she often didn't feel she had the choice to say no. The prosecution's theory is chilling, that these intimate coercive encounters weren't private fantasies. They were commercial intimate acts, often involving transported individuals, drugs, violence, and manipulation. And behind it all stood one man, orchestrating everything with the help of his empire. But if the drugs and hotel items raised eyebrows, what came next raised serious legal alarms, because it tied physical violence, coercion, and fear directly to the events themselves. And at the center of it all was Cassie. When Cassandra Ventura, known to the world as Cassie, took the stand, the courtroom shifted. What had, until now, been presented as a sequence of evidence and logistics suddenly became visceral, personal, real, because Cassie wasn't just testifying about events, she was reliving them. And what she described wasn't just a toxic relationship with a controlling man. It was, in her words, a nightmare, carried out behind private doors by one of the most powerful men in music. She didn't hold back. With a calm but unshakable voice, she detailed years of abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, and how Diddy allegedly used fear, violence, and even video recordings of intimate acts to control her. "He would mash me in my head," she said, "knock me over, drag me, kick me. He would strike me repeatedly, even when I was already down." When asked how often this happened, her answer chilled the room. Too frequently. She spoke of black eyes, busted lips, knots in her forehead, and bruises all over her body. Injuries, she says, became part of her normal life. She said that sometimes she wouldn't even consider going to the hospital, not because she wasn't hurt, but because it wouldn't change anything. The people around Diddy, his security, his staff, were allegedly there not to protect her, but to protect him. One story stood out among the rest. Cassie recalled a night when she was trying to pack for a music festival. She dozed off on the couch. When she woke up, Diddy was standing over her, screaming. Two people, Mia and Deontay, were also in the apartment and had to physically jump on Diddy's back to stop him from attacking her. "He threw me toward the bed frame," she said. "I had a gash on my eyebrow. It bled a lot." She didn't go to the ER. Instead, she said, Diddy had his security escort her to a plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills, one willing to open the office on a Sunday for emergency stitches, quietly. No reports, no questions, just another day in the life of someone under his control. And it wasn't just physical abuse. Cassie described how Diddy would allegedly use private footage to manipulate and intimidate her, explicit recordings of their intimate coercive encounters that he claimed were deleted. One time, she said, he played them for her on a commercial flight, right there on his laptop, surrounded by other passengers. He looked her in the eyes and told her he would embarrass her and ruin everything. "I felt trapped," she said, like there was no way out. She explained that sometimes participating in these intimate, coercive encounters wasn't even about physical fear anymore. It was about survival, about avoiding another beating, about keeping what little peace she could find in a storm of psychological warfare. And she wasn't the only one. Multiple witnesses, Dawn Richard, former member of Danity Kane, Cassie's best friend Carrie Morgan, and even Daniel Phillips, a male escort allegedly hired by Diddy, backed up her account. They saw the bruises, they heard the screams. Some of them, like Phillips, even claimed they were part of the coercion. Phillips testified that he witnessed Diddy drag Cassie into a room, then heard loud slapping sounds from behind the door. All of it, the threats, the violence, the intimate coercive encounters, the recordings, fit a larger pattern the prosecution is now laying out. That this wasn't about one woman in one bad relationship. This was about control, fear, and a man allegedly willing to use anything, money, muscle, or humiliation, to get what he wanted. And as her voice echoed in the courtroom, the question wasn't whether Cassie had suffered. The question became, how many others had stayed silent? In most celebrity trials, the truth is buried under layers of speculation, and he said, she said. But in this case, the prosecution didn't just come armed with words. They came with evidence, and not the kind that can be brushed off with PR spin. We're talking about photographs, prescription bottles, forensic lab results, and even video footage, each one reinforcing the narrative that this wasn't just a toxic romance, but a calculated system of abuse. One of the most haunting exhibits shown in court was a photograph of Cassie's face, bloodied, bruised, and swollen, a gash above her eyebrow. According to her testimony, this was the result of being thrown onto a bed frame during a violent outburst. She didn't go to a hospital. Instead, she says, Diddy arranged for a private plastic surgeon to discreetly treat the wound in Beverly Hills on a Sunday. Why? Prosecutors argue it wasn't about helping her. It was about covering it up. This, they claim, is part of the pattern. Injuries erased from the public eye, handled quietly by staff who knew better than to ask questions. And the more this pattern was exposed, the more disturbing it became. But the physical evidence didn't stop with injuries. Agents also submitted photographs of items recovered during raids, a prescription bottle under the name Frank Black, an alias allegedly used by Diddy. Inside, Ziploc bags containing a mysterious pink powder. Lab tests confirmed the substances, ketamine and MDMA. Both drugs, according to testimony, were reportedly used during the intimate coercive encounters to disorient and control participants. Cassie testified that she often felt numb, unable to process what was happening during these encounters. The presence of these drugs doesn't just support her story, it lays the foundation for criminal intent, especially under forced exploitation through fraud, laws that consider the use of substances to impair consent. Then came the eyewitnesses, 3 people from different parts of Diddy's orbit, all saying the same thing. They saw the violence, they saw the manipulation, they saw her fear. Dawn. Richard, a former Danity Kane member and collaborator with Diddy, testified that she urged Cassie to leave after seeing her injured. But she admitted she didn't push harder because she was afraid. She didn't want to become a target. Carrie Morgan, Cassie's former best friend, told the jury she witnessed physical assaults on at least 2 occasions. She described Diddy's rages as unpredictable and said Cassie seemed trapped. And then there was Daniel Phillips, a man who says he was hired by Diddy to sleep with Cassie. He testified that after being paid to participate in a sexual encounter, he saw Diddy drag Cassie into a room and then heard the unmistakable sound of slaps and cries from behind the door. According to prosecutors, Phillips's testimony is key because it supports multiple charges: coercion, commercial intimate acts, and interstate transport for prostitution. It also shows that Diddy wasn't just orchestrating intimate coercive encounters. He was controlling who was in them, who was paid, and who stayed silent. Put together, the testimony and physical evidence tell a chillingly consistent story. This wasn't chaos. It was structure. It was deliberate. It was systematic. And as more voices began to echo Cassie's story, the defense's narrative that this was just a rocky love story started to unravel. But what truly changed public perception wasn't something said in court. It was something seen. A moment caught on camera. A piece of video evidence that shook the case. And the internet. Sometimes a single image can change everything. In this case, it was a video. Just a few seconds of surveillance footage that, once released, shattered any illusion that this was simply a he said, she said situation. It was 2016 at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles. The clip, played in court and later leaked to the public, showed Shawn Diddy Combs wearing nothing but a towel and socks, physically assaulting Cassie Ventura in a hallway, using force to restrain and intimidate her. There was no sound, no context, but there didn't need to be. The images were graphic, undeniable, and brutal. You could see her trying to pull away. You could see the force. You could see the fear. And in that moment, the courtroom wasn't the only place where opinions were shifting. The video went viral almost instantly after CNN released a redacted portion. Twitter feeds exploded. Comment sections flooded. Support for Diddy, once untouchable in the eyes of many, began to collapse in real time. But for prosecutors, this footage wasn't just public relations ammo. It was evidence. Evidence that showed a man allegedly using violence to dominate and control a woman, confirming what Cassie had described in agonizing detail. She had testified that she was trying to leave a hotel room after a freak-off gone wrong. Diddy, she said, chased her into the hallway, grabbed her, slammed her, kicked her. The only reason she escaped, she claimed, was because a security guard intervened. But that detail, about the security guard, soon took on a new, darker meaning. According to the prosecution, shortly after the incident, Diddy allegedly tried to bribe that same security guard to stay quiet. That allegation, while still under investigation, plays directly into the racketeering charge, a pattern of committing crimes and then using money, influence, or intimidation to cover them up. And when you look at the full timeline, the video becomes more than just a visual of domestic violence. It becomes a building block in a much larger criminal case, because it shows use of force in a setting tied to alleged forced exploitation through fraud, activity, Cassie attempting to flee and being violently stopped, a potential witness, the security guard, who was allegedly offered hush money, and the presence of staff, security, assistants, handlers, right in the middle of it all. Prosecutors argue that this video is one of the clearest examples of how Diddy used violence to maintain control, to enforce compliance, to keep women trapped in a cycle of abuse disguised as loyalty or love. And even for those who wanted to believe this was all a smear campaign, the footage was difficult to rationalize. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't an accusation. It was visual proof. For the jury, it created something powerful: context. Now, when Cassie talked about threats, a tool for threat-based manipulation, or manipulation, they had seen it play out. They had watched the force. They had seen what happened when she tried to say no. And while the defense scrambled to downplay it as a volatile moment in a dysfunctional relationship, public perception had already turned. Because there's something about seeing the violence with your own eyes that changes how you hear everything else. But this was far from the end. Because the video only captured one incident, the full scope of the prosecution's case: coercion, private footage, interstate forced exploitation through fraud, goes far beyond what was caught on tape. And what came next would expose an even more chilling pattern. Not just violence, not just silence, but a system of a tool for threat-based manipulation, humiliation, and psychological control. By now, the jury had seen the bruises. They'd seen the video. They'd heard from witnesses. But in this section of Cassie's testimony, it became clear that Diddy's alleged abuse wasn't always physical. Sometimes it was far more calculated: emotional domination disguised as love, control disguised as protection. One of the most revealing incidents took place on a luxury yacht just before the Cannes Film Festival. On the surface, it sounded like a dream, cruising the French Riviera, red carpets, flashing cameras. But for Cassie, it turned into something else entirely. She testified that the night before the big premiere, she and Diddy got into a heated argument. He accused her of taking drugs from him, something she denied. But that didn't matter. What happened next shocked the courtroom. He kicked her off the yacht, barefoot, alone, early in the morning. Her passport, her clothes, her phone, everything was still on the boat. She had to walk alone to a hotel where some of his staff were staying and asked to crash in a spare room. There were no police, no friends, just silence. But that wasn't the worst part. The next day, she still had to walk the red carpet, forced to smile, pose, and play the part of the glamorous partner of a music mogul, while still emotionally shattered from the night before. Then came the flight home. According to Cassie, she made an effort to avoid sitting next to Diddy by swapping seats. But it didn't work. He ended up next to her anyway. And that's when it happened. He opened his laptop and started playing freak-off videos, graphic, intimate footage she thought had been deleted. Videos of their sexual encounters, some involving other people, recorded without her full understanding or consent. He told me he was going to release them, she testified, to embarrass me, to ruin everything for me. She said she felt trapped, humiliated, exposed, and not just because of the content. They were on a commercial flight, surrounded by strangers, and yet he still chose to play the footage. No shame, no fear. He made me feel like I was nothing, she said, like he owned me. And it didn't stop when they landed. Cassie testified that after they arrived in New York, they went straight to dinner. And then, according to her, Diddy demanded a freak-off. It wasn't a question. It wasn't romantic. It was compliance under threat. She admitted to going through with it, not because she wanted to, but because she just wanted it to end, because she was afraid of what might happen if she resisted again. This is where the prosecution sharpened its focus, because these weren't isolated episodes of emotional abuse. They were, in their view, methods of control, used over time, used with intent, used to break someone down psychologically so they would comply without resistance. The threats, the public humiliation, the leveraging of explicit footage, the removal of her passport, the withholding of basic safety, and perhaps most damning of all, the use of staff to coordinate her movements, deliver her to locations, book hotel rooms, and even assist in what appeared to be cover-ups. In the eyes of the prosecution, this wasn't just a dysfunctional relationship. It was an operation, a human enterprise built on fear, manipulation, and silence. But even that wouldn't be the end of it. Because as the trial progressed, the court was shown another side of Diddy's alleged obsession with control, one that extended beyond Cassie to anyone who got too close. By this point, the courtroom had heard enough to paint a disturbing portrait of control. But then came something even more shocking, an alleged attempt by Diddy not just to dominate Cassie, but to destroy anyone who dared get close to her. One name suddenly surfaced in court, and it sent ripples through the gallery: Kid Cudi. The acclaimed rapper, also known as Scott Mescudi, was reportedly in contact with Cassie at one point during her relationship with Diddy. It wasn't clear if they were romantically involved, but to Diddy, the idea alone was unacceptable. Cassie testified that Diddy found out about her communication with Kid Cudi by reading through emails between her and a member of his own staff. And what followed, according to her, was a terrifying moment of pure rage. She recalled him grabbing a wine bottle opener, placing it between his fingers like a weapon, and lunging toward her. His eyes, she said, blacked out. He was furious, beyond reason. She fled. And for once, she was able to get away, spending the night elsewhere, reportedly with Cudi himself. But the drama didn't end there. A short time later, Cassie flew home to Connecticut for Christmas. What she told the court next came straight from a documented piece of evidence, an email she sent to her mother from an alias account named Veronica Bang. The subject line? Threats. In the message, Cassie wrote that Diddy had threatened to release 2 explicit sex tapes, one on Christmas Day and another shortly after. But the threats didn't stop at humiliation. He also allegedly said he would have someone physically harm both her and Kid Cudi. And then, the most chilling part, he told her he'd be out of the country when it happened. To distance himself from whatever was about to go down, that email became a crucial piece of evidence. Why? Because what happened next is still under criminal investigation, but impossible to ignore. Kid Cudi's vehicle was reportedly destroyed in a suspicious incident at his home. Yes, exploded. According to multiple reports, and now raised in open court by prosecutors, Cudi's vehicle was blown up shortly after the threats were made. No one was harmed, but the message was clear. And when Kid Cudi was later asked about it by investigators, he allegedly confirmed that Diddy had, in fact, made prior threats. Though Cudi hasn't testified yet, and the defense denies Diddy had any role in the incident, the prosecution strongly suggested that this act of intimidation through violence fits the broader pattern. Not just domestic abuse, not just coercion, but a coordinated campaign of fear, reaching beyond Cassie, to friends, collaborators, and anyone seen as disloyal. And here's where it ties back to racketeering. In order to prove racketeering conspiracy, prosecutors must show at least 2 predicate acts, crimes committed as part of a coordinated criminal enterprise. They already have forced exploitation through fraud, through coercion, bribery of hotel staff, transportation for prostitution. Now they may be able to include suspected property destruction as part of the case. And if it can be proven that Diddy ordered or orchestrated the car explosion, even indirectly, it becomes yet another block in the foundation of the prosecution's case, a symbol of how far he was allegedly willing to go to maintain control and punish defiance. But this wasn't the final word, because as the trial moves forward, the central debate remains. Was this all part of a chaotic, destructive relationship, or was it something far more dangerous? A sprawling criminal enterprise, hidden in plain sight? After weeks of testimony, disturbing imagery, and high-profile revelations, the question looming over the courtroom and the entire country boils down to this: was it a toxic, violent relationship, or was it something far worse? A criminal empire masked by fame? The defense is adamant. This is not a federal racketeering case. According to Diddy's legal team, what the public sees as manipulation and abuse is, in their words, a portrait of a tumultuous but deeply personal relationship. Yes, they admit there were fights. Yes, there was violence. But they argue that doesn't amount to forced exploitation through fraud. It doesn't equate to racketeering. They insist that Cassie was a willing partner, that the so-called intimate coercive encounters were consensual, and that the events being described, however unconventional, do not prove the existence of a criminal enterprise. Their strategy is clear: frame the story as messy, emotional, and human, but not criminal. But the prosecution sees it differently. They've spent the trial meticulously connecting the dots. Each testimony, each piece of physical evidence, each internal email or video, into what they argue is a deliberate pattern, a structure, a system. In their narrative, this wasn't just a man with anger issues. This was a man who used his entire empire, his record label, his bodyguards, his assistants, his financial power, as tools to commit, enable, and cover up criminal acts. They point to Cassie's testimony and how Diddy allegedly used violence, a tool for threat-based manipulation, and drugs to force compliance. They highlight how staff arranged hotel rooms, transported people across state lines, and helped cover up physical injuries. They underscore how threats were made, not just to Cassie, but to Kid Cudi, possibly ending in arson. And they remind the jury that these weren't isolated outbursts, but repeated actions, spanning years, cities, and dozens of people. To win a racketeering conviction, the government doesn't need to prove that Diddy personally committed every act. They need to prove he led or operated a criminal enterprise, that he directed others, and that at least 2 underlying crimes were committed as part of that enterprise. So far, they have laid the groundwork for far more than 2. Forced exploitation through fraud via coercion, transportation for prostitution, possession and use of controlled substances, bribery of hotel staff, threats and a tool for threat-based manipulation, and potentially even arson. For the jury, the challenge is enormous. They must not only weigh the truthfulness of each witness, but also interpret the intent behind the chaos. Was Diddy a volatile, controlling figure whose relationship imploded publicly? Or was he a man who weaponized his stardom to create an underground system of exploitation? In the world of federal law, intent matters. Patterns matter. And when those patterns stretch across state lines, involve vulnerable individuals, and include money, drugs, and manipulation, the courtroom starts looking less like a breakup trial and more like the takedown of an organized syndicate. The defense will argue that it's a stretch. The prosecution will argue that it's exactly what it looks like. And the jury? They now hold the future of one of hip-hop's most powerful men in their hands. As the courtroom proceedings continue and more layers are pulled back, one thing is clear. This case is no longer just about celebrity scandal. It's about power, silence, and the invisible cost of fame. Over the course of the trial, the prosecution has presented an avalanche of material: testimonies, surveillance footage, physical injuries, prescription drugs, emails, explicit threats, alleged acts of violence carried out not in secret shadows, but in hotel rooms, on yachts, and even in commercial flights, often surrounded by employees who said nothing. There's the emotional testimony from Cassie, supported by witnesses who say they saw the bruises and feared for their own safety. There's the video evidence that went viral, showing Diddy allegedly attacking her in a hallway. There's the exploding car in Kid Cudi's driveway, eerily matching prior threats made in writing. And above all, there's the consistency of the pattern, a disturbing rhythm of abuse, intimidation, and control that prosecutors claim goes beyond dysfunction into organized criminal conduct. Now, all eyes are on the jury. Will they view this as a tragic love story gone horribly wrong? A chaotic and abusive relationship that spiraled out of control, but remained, at its core, personal? Or will they see it the way the federal government does, as a criminal enterprise, one where Diddy allegedly used his fame, resources, and loyal network to manipulate, traffic, silence, and punish? It's no longer just about what happened between 2 people behind closed doors. It's about what those doors were hiding. The stakes couldn't be higher, not just for Diddy, but for what this case could represent. A conviction would not only shatter his legacy, it would send a message that wealth and celebrity are not shields against justice. That silence, no matter how expensive, can eventually break. But on the other side of the scale lies doubt, reasonable doubt. And that, as any prosecutor knows, can be enough to let the most powerful walk free. So, we're left with a question that still has no answer. Was this the unraveling of a broken relationship? or the exposure of a machine built on manipulation and fear? Because in the end, if even half of what's been alleged is true, then we may be witnessing the fall of an empire built on silence.